Hello, everyone. Good evening, friends. My name is Rabindra Jhunjhunwala. Very, very warm welcome to this conversation. This is the seventh in the series of if I may quickly introduce Ramanan, he is a founder and director of the Center for Disease Dynamics, Economics and Policy, CDDEP in short, in Washington and in Washington, DC and New Delhi. He's a senior research scholar at Princeton University. He's an affiliate professor at various universities. He's a visiting professor at some universities. And he's also a founder and board chair at Health Cubed, which works to improve access to healthcare and diagnostics worldwide. And I'm going to come very quickly to you, Ramanan, to ask you about Health Cubed. I was very intrigued when I read a little bit about it. So if we can start with that. But most importantly, since 1995, our guest speaker has been working on improving the understanding of antibiotic resistance as a problem of managing shared global resource. He is an epidemiologist. I had to Google it the first time when I heard of Ramanan, and a common friend introduced me to him. I had no clue what it is and was very impressed to find that there is somebody who studies viruses. I also found out that Ramanan is an economist as well. So it's a very interesting combination of a health economist that we have today as a speaker. So Ramanan, thank you once again and very warm welcome to Lockdown Conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Before we start, do you want to just tell us what Health Cube is? Because I thought it was very interesting what you're doing.
Right. So Rabindra, this is my usual hat is I'm, as you explained, I'm a professor. I teach. I have students, and then I do research. But a few years ago, a few colleagues and I we reached a conclusion that research alone was not sufficient. That we had to play some role in taking that to deliver solutions, particularly when it came to primary healthcare, diagnostics and so forth, because the current ecosystem was not allowing that to happen in the private sector anyway. And so we started with building multi-platform diagnostics. This basically means that it is something, think of it as like an iPhone for diagnostics. So essentially a small box that can do, multiple tests in your home itself, like an EKG, or it can do blood pressure and tests for whether you're having a heart attack or whether you're having a stroke. All of these can be done right from the safety of your home. And then in the more recent, in this COVID situation, I was approached by CP Gurnani, who's the CEO of Tech Mahindra, because Tech Mahindra has had issues like many other workplaces with COVID in their workplace. And he said, listen, can we do anything about this in terms of a screening that goes beyond temperature? Because, I've written back in January itself on this to say that temperature screening is the most ineffective screening for COVID. I know everywhere someone's pointing a gun at your head, but it's useless because most of those guns, by the way, don't work. At my neighborhood coffee place, I asked the guy how much the temperature was. He said 87 degrees, sir. I said, if I have 87 degrees, I should be dead by now. But most COVID people are asymptomatic, so they're not going to show up with temperature. So we devised a solution which was around risk factors. There are specific risk factors, particular biomarkers that show whether you're at risk for high severe COVID disease. These are things like D-dimer, troponin I, other markers like C-reactive protein and procalcitonin will tell you if you are at risk for a bacterial versus a viral infection. All of these help construct an image. And the reason why this construction of the image around that individual is important is because today we think of COVID testing as one test, which is this PCR test. And that's what the government is handing out and so forth. But we have to remember that that test is only about, at best, 70% sensitive and only during the first 8 days of infection. Now, this is a highly unsatisfactory situation because 70% in the first 8 days of infection, but you can be infectious even after that, doesn't tell you very much. So we need to construct a better picture of who's infectious, why. And when we first started, we ran a trial in CP's house, and he won't mind my saying this because it's going to be in someone's newspaper article tomorrow. And he was fine. The rest of his family was fine. But it turned out that two of his cook's sons were carrying IgM antibodies. And IgM antibodies indicate that they're currently in an infectious state. Now, that would not have been picked up by a PCR test. And CP or any of his family could have easily got the virus from his cook's sons, even though they're observing all precautions and so forth. And that's a real, today we hear about Amitabh Bachchan and Abhishek Bachchan. Where could they have gotten COVID? Easy, because anyone around you, whether they have a fever or whatever, they look, like they have symptoms. It doesn't really matter. If they are infectious, you will only find that out with antibody tests or a combination of test metrics. And that's what this whole HealthCube solution that was deployed there. Now, this is being deployed across Tech Mahindra for their entire workforce, as a matter of fact. So this is where we're going with this.
Very, very interesting, Ramanan. Thank you very much for sharing. And I'm guessing that this, what you're devising can also be used for, our once normalcy returns or getting back to office. And maybe we can speak about it in a little while, if that's all right. Okay, so as before, we are going to jump straight to the questions, but very quickly, we want to get you to answer to a few questions. It will give us a bit of context and bit of direction where we are going. And if Samuel, if you can please put up the poll questions. It's going to come up on your screen, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't mind responding to it. Samuel, the poll questions, please.
Yes, it's up.
Thank you. Sorry, is it there? I don't see it on the screen.
I can see it.
Oh, you can?
Yeah. It's up.
All right. For some reason, I don't see the questions on the screen. This is being streamed live on Facebook, but unfortunately, we can't have the poll questions on Facebook. I will, however, repeat the questions and I will give you the results. In fact, Ramanan, you'll probably have to help me there because I don't.
I can help you.
For some strange reason, I don't have the results or the questions in front of me.
I think
maybe if you repeat the question first and then.
So 1% of the audience has been infected with the novel coronavirus. 99% have not, and 87% think that the lockdown helped controlling the spread of the novel coronavirus, and 13% said no.
Sorry, did you say 80%? 87 said it did help.
Yes, and 13% said it.
Okay. All right. So not surprising. So Ramanan, I'm going to ask you the first question, which is, what is so novel about this virus? From what I know, what I've understood, this has been around for many years. Is it a modified form or mutated form? Sometimes we refer it to as a Wuhan virus. Is it accidentally created or purposefully created somewhere uh, for a country to gain economic supremacy? What went wrong? If you could just give us some thoughts on that, please.
So that's a great question, Ravindra, and a lot of people ask me this. Turns out that every day of the year, there is some virus that's trying to jump from animals to humans. Why do they want to do that? I mean, remember, viruses are only trying to make a better life for themselves. That's all they care about. And so they basically are trying to jump from animals to humans because they like to gain a host. And therefore, they can spread with that host. And remember, when they spread to a new host, they are actually not trying to kill us either, because killing us has no advantage for them. The killing is a matter of misunderstanding between us and the virus. The killing is mostly ourselves. Our immune response is really what ends up killing. So this happens every day of the year, but the characteristics that it takes for a virus to jump from one human being to another is even more difficult. So first, it's difficult for them to jump to us and infect us. There are many viruses that infect dogs and cats and sheep and all that don't actually jump to us. And we have viruses that don't jump to them. But sometimes that transfer happens, and sometimes it then is even transmissible from one human being to another. And that's what ends up causing these sort of novel events. Now, keep in mind, this happens all the time, and it happens in all countries. We have viruses that have happened, that have jumped from animals to humans here in this country. Some of you may have heard of the Nipah virus. Nipah is a very unusual bat virus that jumps to humans not directly, but through this very unusual mechanism where bats then eat uh, fruits, which then the droppings are eaten by pigs, and then the pigs get the infection and then transmit to us. Or the bat urine gets into toddy or palm sugar and then gets to us. So these are very complex methods. And this particular example of this coronavirus, we've only had a couple of coronaviruses that have been serious threats to us before, which are SARS and which happened in 2002, 2003, and then MERS, the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, which has highly dangerous because it kills about 30-35% of people that it infects. That was possibly spread from camels to humans. But these typically are what are called zoonotic infections, and the novel coronavirus is not the first, it won't be the last. We will continue to have these. And as we encroach more on wildlife and habitat and so forth, there is a greater opportunity for them to transmit viruses to us. Ebola is a good example. Ebola came to us. It was a virus that was possibly killing, gorillas, for instance. But some hunter in the forest finds a dead gorilla and thinks it's my lucky day and eats the gorilla, and then they get infected, and then they take it back to their families, and the chain of infection spreads. So I think it's safe to say that the proximity of human beings to animals, and particularly even to domestic animals, is a big risk factor. We don't know at this time if this particular virus was engineered by the Chinese. The only reason I doubt that was the case was because why would the Chinese want to kill themselves first? And the second is there are many natural pathways by which it happens. It doesn't have to be engineered. Like I said, it happens anyway. And if you ever go to a wet market in China, you will find, it's a situation which you would have never encountered before. There'll be snakes and other, exotic animals, pangolins and bats and everything, and the blood and the saliva, everything mixed in. I mean, if you can think of an ideal situation to transmit a virus, it exists in these wet markets. And it exists in these wet markets because the Chinese like to do all this stuff. And that's really what the big risk factor is. And I don't think it's necessarily them engineering the virus, although we can't rule it out at this point.
Okay. Um, so why was SARS, and you referred to MERS, MERS, why were they so well contained compared to what we are seeing with the novel coronavirus?
Great question. So SARS actually 2002, very similar timeline as we followed here. November they found it. The Chinese didn't tell us about it till April of the next year. So compared to that, the Chinese have been very forthcoming this time. SARS, they just didn't tell the world anything at all. And for some reason, that virus just died out. It was unclear why. It was a virus with about 10% mortality rate, so much higher than with the novel coronavirus. But it did not die out because of control measures. It died out because of reasons we don't really fully know. could have been temperature, it could be many things. It spread quite effectively to Canada, many other countries, and it died that way. MERS is not dead yet. MERS is still very much alive. There are still MERS outbreaks periodically around the world. There was one outbreak in South Korea. There are typically outbreaks in the Middle East. And this was one of the reasons why very early on when people said to me, oh, but this will be killed by the summer heat. And I was like, well, are you sure? Because MERS transmits very well in the Saudi heat of 47 degrees. Doesn't seem to have any problem at all transmitting in high temperatures. So we don't know if coronaviruses don't transmit in high temperatures, and it would be a mistake to assume that's the case. So MERS is still with us. SARS is gone to the best of our knowledge. And of course, there's novel coronavirus by all indications is here to stay.
Interesting. Thank you very much. And there's a hypothesis floating around that we have some immunity, and there's some protective. Uh, um, we are protected from the impact of COVID, and that's probably one reason why cases in India are low. And I go back to some discussions and papers that I read, where for tuberculosis we are given this BCG vaccine, and we are given this MMR vaccine for measles, mumps, and rubella. And when I further read up, I realized that in some countries they don't actually give some of these vaccines. Uh, BCG definitely not. MMR probably not. Um, Korea, I believe there is some example where MMR vaccine was given recently. I believe there is another country, I'm forgetting the name, in 2019, it gave MMR vaccine to everyone. Uh, how do you compare some of this data, the vaccine recently, the MMR, which was given, and C19 data in that country? And are we really thick skinned? And that's the reason why the cases are low, or is it some other reason?
The reason why cases appear to be low in India is simply because we don't test enough. That's a simple reason. In early April, ICMR did what is called a serology study. So when you're exposed to the virus, your body develops antibodies to fight the virus. In fact, that is the reason the virus leaves your body, because your body is fighting it. And it's also what can cause your body to have a very overactive response and end up causing fever or other things that might kill you yourself. But this antibody is a good indicator, the seroconversion, whether we have the antibodies or not, is really a good indicator of whether we have seen the virus, whether our body's seen the virus or not. And these are done through methods called serology tests. There are 2 or 3 methods that are out there. And when the ICMR did this, they found that in 60 districts that the prevalence of seropositivity was about 0.73%. I have seen data from smaller studies. I have data from other states because I advise, 2 southern states as well, that we have seropositivity rates which are as high as 3-4%, and in Mumbai I hear it's even potentially higher than that. Now, even a 0.73% seropositivity rate means that 10 million people were infected back in early early May itself. If there are 10 million, so remember, we get first cases in March, you get to 10 million by May, right? Just in 2 months, you're getting to 10 million. Do you really think that we have less than 100 million infections in the country right now? I think we do. I think on the rank of numbers on countries testing per capita, we are 138th today. I think Pakistan is one level below us, or at least one level above us. We are 138th. We are missing most COVID infections. We are undercounting. We're probably counting one COVID infection for every 100 that is truly out there. And we're undercounting deaths also. And that is just the simple fact of the matter. I don't think there is any difference in COVID in India versus COVID anywhere else. We are no more immune to it or no less immune to it than a black person, a Chinese person, a Latin American, or a Caucasian, or anything else. It's exactly the same because no human being has actually encountered this virus before. So we have no protection against it. This whole BCG hypothesis is actually an old one. Uh, every time there's a new infection, there's a sense that the generalized hypothesis goes as follows, which is that live viruses, whether it's polio or BCG, that these confer some sort of special immunity protection. And this has been a topic of interest for for us for years to see if this is really true. And there is no truth to this matter. So it's a complete fallacy that we are in some ways special. And in fact, I had said this back in February itself that, when people said, oh, but we won't be affected by it because we have all of these factors. And that was the point at which I said, well, this is not really going to happen. And there is nothing to believe that we're protected in some special way.
Okay, we're going to come back to what we should do to protect ourselves. But thanks for bringing us back to earth. At least some people who think that we are thick-skinned and we won't get it. Ramanan, when I was first starting to research about our discussion today, I saw a fair bit of press and media where you had in March, and if I remember the date correctly, 20th of March and then 22 March, a few days before lockdown was announced, you had made some predictions. And those predictions seemed to peg the number very high in India. Your initial numbers. And then after some days, I believe you revised the numbers. And we are nowhere close to the number. So what were you at that point of time thinking? Was it your call for action to bring lockdown? Was it that you had the numbers completely wrong? Um, let me stop there because I have a few more things to ask you. Uh, you had made some predictions. Those numbers were very high. What was on your mind?
So I'll tell you what the prediction was for people who might not have watched these. These were interviews with Karan Thapar and with Barkha, but it was in other places as well. And by the way, I was not the only one with these predictions. It was also an ICMR paper on this, and then an Imperial College paper. So we were all in good company because, see, for an epidemiologist to model a disease to which nobody has immunity is actually the easiest thing in the world because it's a very clean slate. You're saying, I have a clean slate, I have a new virus, how many people are actually going to get infected? And we had estimated, I mean, our own estimates were between 200 and probably about 400 million people were infected, would have been infected before the end of July if nothing were to be done about it. Now, why do we model stuff like that? Because I can't model what will happen based on what people will do. I can only tell you what the situation will be if you do nothing at all. This is like a doctor telling you, Rabindra, if you continue to smoke and you don't lose weight or you don't run every day, then your chance of dying is X. If you then change and actually stop smoking and improve your diet, that obviously changes the odds, right? So you can't say, oh, but you said I would die at this time because of this. But I said under a particular situation where you do nothing and in the current situation, that's what will happen. And that was the kind of prediction that we would make because it's important to make those predictions because that lockdown message was not just meant for the public, it was meant for within government as well. I do talk frequently to government media. And it was to emphasize very seriously for a lot of actors within government who were taking it in this very easy way because they said, H1 and N1 aa gaya, it affected other people, didn't really affect us, so we are not going to be very seriously impacted by it. And I was worried by that kind of an attitude to it. And I said, look, this is really what's going to happen if you don't do anything about it. So, but I said the solution will have to be that there is a lockdown. Now, there are two things that go into it. First is the numbers of infections, which in a sense is easier to predict because there's a certain, how shall I say, there's a certain math that drives how the virus spreads. It's the virus is actually the easy part to understand. The difficult part to understand is how human beings respond, either through lockdowns or through mask wearing, to how we will respond to the virus. And that's the difficult part to really model. And of course, we couldn't actually do anything of that sort. And what we said was that, listen, 200 to 400 million infections, that's similar to what the ICMR's own estimates were from colleagues of mine who are in there. And was that such an outrageous estimate? No. Like I said, we're probably at 100 million infections right now. I mean, if you remember that the 800,000 infections that you see are reported cases. These are reported cases by a system where RT-PCR testing is abysmal and amongst the lowest in the world. And we are picking up probably 1 in 100, if not probably 1 in 150 of these infections. And so 800,000, get to 100 million is not that hard at all. And remember, the virus is spreading all the time. Now, the part where we have probably overestimated is potentially, and I say that potentially because these are numbers that we will only resolve once we have, we have a full understanding of this, is really on the mortality rate. And at that time, back in March, we only had mortality rates that were coming out of China or out of Italy. And we had no other information. The way science works is that you take the best possible information. As the facts change, then you change your mind about it. But if do I know back in March how Indians will die compared to how other people will die? No, I don't think it's fundamentally about that. It's really that we didn't have a good understanding back in March. We know infinitely more now than we knew back in March. It is not that Indians are different. It is just that the Chinese and the Italians themselves had overestimated. The second, of course, which benefits us, which we always knew and we corrected for this, is the fact that India is a young population. But and which means that younger people are less likely to die of the virus. However, that doesn't protect us a huge amount. We have a big paper that's coming out soon which shows that half of the deaths are actually in people under the age of 60. 30 to 60 have a high mortality rate compared to other countries. Why? Because we have a lot of undetected hypertension, diabetes. All of these are risk factors for dying. The third issue is really around medical knowledge. Now, in March, we didn't have a clue how to deal with this virus once someone is admitted to the hospital. Today, we know that you ventilate someone in a prone position, or there's so much that we know about how to deal with someone clinically for COVID, what you need to have ready, because every single day there are papers that are coming out that are based on experience. And that was very important, I think, in also driving down the mortality rate for India, which is that the clinicians here have better knowledge than the Chinese did in February, or the Italians did in early March. And that's going to also reduce the mortality because we're able to do better at protecting people from dying. But I think the fundamental prediction still stands in the sense of the prediction was do nothing, and this is likely is what will happen. And of course, if you have the lockdown, then you do two things. You push the peak out significantly, but you also manage to reduce the mortality rate because the important part of the lockdown is really this fact that it is driving home a message to the population that it's important enough to shut the country down, therefore wear a mask, or therefore keep social distance. And I have to say that although people will say, oh, I went out today, there are lots of people not wearing masks, but I'm happy with the 60, 70% of people that I saw wearing masks. And that gives me hope and confidence. So long answer, but I just wanted to give you a sense for how we think about these sorts of problems. And I wanted to liken it to personal physician advice, which is the advice is what happens if you don't do anything. That's the
No, I think it was important for you to give the answer the way you gave it, because I did have a few people who asked me pointedly when I told them about this conversation and about my guest speaker. And the way I read it, frankly, it's very logical answer to their question was, you said it when you said it before the lockdown. It was 20th March and 22 March, and the lockdown happened thereafter. So of course, this is something which it was something where you were, it was a call for action. So I'm totally with you there. Ramanan, if we can move on and very quickly, if you don't mind telling us, where do you think India is today? What stage are we at? Have we seen the peak? Are we seeing the curve? It definitely doesn't seem to be plateauing. And we'll talk about the second wave later. We'll talk about predictions later. But where do you see India today? What stage are we at?
So, you see many countries which had lockdowns, and you see it went up and sort of went down. That didn't happen in India, or it doesn't happen in, say, South Africa, for instance, is because our ability to actually contain the epidemic through lockdowns is very limited because of the structure of our population. And at some level, I want us to get away from this idea of how much control we have over the virus. India is what it is. We are who we are. We have a dense population. Transmission is very easy, and lockdown is not an easy way to solve the problem. And so far, we've only had a law and order solution to the problem. We've not really had a, I mean, with some exceptions. Obviously, Mumbai does really well, Dharavi does really well. But I think this is how it's going to happen. The disease is going to continue to spread. The vaccine is not going to arrive in any meaningful way till end of 2021, end of 2021, by which time this virus would have burned through the population. And if we can keep the mortality rate relatively low, I still think we're undercounting mortality by a factor of about 4 or 5. But even if the mortality is 100,000, that's still really good considering our population size. And if we are able to get through the end of this and achieve some sense of having most of people having experienced the infection or having built up some immunity, that's how this is going to roll. It is not going to happen by coming down of the epidemic, because we literally have entire countries embedded within our country. We have a Brazil. We have, Europe is just one, few states within our country. So I think we've got to be mindful of the fact that this is not a reflection on national performance or national pride. I think we've done the best that we can. There are things that we could have done better, no doubt about it. But overall, I think we've done what we can, and this is just. I mean, what can you say? This is who we are. This is how it's going to work out.
Okay, I'm going to take that with a pinch of salt. Um, and I'll come to the economic impact of all of this in a bit. But do you think the virus could, while we are discussing all this, mutate itself and come in another form than the current form that it is today? Whether it is less virulent or more virulent, and the sense, and maybe a second part to that question is has the severity of the virus come down from what it was in, say, March or April when it hit Europe and US? Because they seem to have had no clue, no answer to it. Whereas today the mortality rate has suddenly dropped.
Right.
So your thoughts on that, Ramanan?
So viruses mutate for a reason. Viruses mutate if it helps themselves. It's a very, if you guys have not read it, you should read The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. That's a good introduction into how these things work. And there are two aspects of virus. One is transmissibility, how easily they transmit. The second is virulence, which actually is not transmissibility, but it's how much they kill the people that they are transmitting into. Now, this particular virus is doing fine on its own. It's actually spreading, really well. It doesn't really have a roadblock, and we don't really know how it's going to change its mutations, because mutations are shaped by how difficult it is for it to transmit. If there's what we call a fitness advantage, if there's a survival advantage for the virus by being less virulent or being less transmissible, which is usually not the case, then it will do so. See, in 1918, the flu pandemic, that particular flu had no fitness cost. It had no disadvantage by killing soldiers, which was mostly transmitting from who were in the trenches of the First World War. It would just jump from one soldier to the other. So killing people was not a disadvantage of the virus, because it just didn't hurt it in any way. In Ebola, it actually hurts it, because if there are deaths in a particular place, no one will go there. So for a virus, that's like an evolutionary dead end. I've killed that person, now I can't jump to anyone else. And it's happening potentially in India as well, where because a lot of deaths are not being picked up, that it doesn't achieve that evolutionary dead end, so it keeps continuing. So it's a slightly more complex end, but I'm trying to explain it to you in a way which says, mutations are not random. They happen and they sustain because it gives the virus some sort of an advantage. And at this current time, it's unclear how that will actually go. Usually viruses mutate in the direction of being less virulent, because there's no particular advantage there. And that's certainly possible here, but we have no evidence of it at this point.
Okay, and some thoughts on what we should be doing just to keep away from the virus. Any simple things. I did hear you say about wearing a mask, but is there anything else that we should continue to do, at least till we don't find a solution to this problem?
I think hand washing, mask wearing, social distancing, these are the only ways. And to put it very selfishly, just keep in mind that there's going to be a bunch of people who don't do that, who are going to be the ones that are infected, who gain immunity, etc., etc. But not everyone will be infected with this virus. Once we have a certain proportion that have immunity, this is like imagine a room with many different people, some of whom are not transmitters at all, and they are acting like blocks for the virus. And you have to decide: do I want to be someone who experiences infection and becomes one of the new people with some risk to myself because I might go into a hospital, or do I just sit tight at home or socially distance, wear a mask, so that I am not one of those people who has to suffer the infection, get to the immune state, where there's a risk that I might die as well. So I think that's the simplest thing. This is what I told my mother back in February. Back in February, I told her, please be prepared to spend the rest of the year indoors because and she's 82 years old. And I told her back in February, this is what you're going to have to look forward to. And she was upset then, but I think now she understands why I said it back to her in February. And I know it's terrible to say that to people. I know it's boring. It's not the best thing in the world, but life is not going to be back to normal till the end of this year and possibly early next year. Um, but I'm hopeful that after that things will be back to normal. I don't think this is going to be a long-term thing.
So the economic impact, I'll come to it, clearly is here to stay.
Yeah.
There are simple steps that you need to do: mask, hand wash, and social distancing,
Yeah.
and probably find ways to keep yourself busy for quite some time and not rush into getting back to normalcy. It is not going to be anytime soon.
Absolutely. I
Uh,
agree.
Okay, so let me move on to what you were mentioning. I think you alluded to a certain number of people getting it, and I think you're probably talking of herd immunity here. Uh, you also mentioned that the vaccine will take some time, and if I heard you correctly, you said 2021. We are a long way from there, and we'll come to a vaccine section separately. I want your thoughts on herd immunity because I did read something in Lancet um, recently, and it talked about how the Spain's coronavirus studies. There's some evidence against herd immunity, and even with certain European countries having been so badly impacted with coronavirus, they had only reached, I think, what, 5% of its population. So would you throw some thoughts about what type of herd immunity are we talking about and where have we reached today?
So herd immunity will that's a whole hour to spend on just this. So I'll try to explain it in just a minute. Herd immunity is just a concept which says that if there are enough people who are immune, the virus transmission cycle is broken because it's like giving the virus to someone who's already immune and then they don't transmit it further. This is why we don't have to vaccinate 100% of the population typically to protect against a virus or bacteria, as the case might be. You only need to vaccinate about 70 or 80%, and that is sufficient. So herd immunity is usually in the context of vaccines. We generally don't always think about it in terms of transmission. This particular virus, we have no control over it, right? So our only hope is that if enough people become immune, that the transmission chain gets broken and it drops. So let's think of it in that way. And herd immunity is not a goal that we pursue. The herd immunity, as the Swedes put it, is a natural consequence of the disease spreading over which we don't have much control. And that's the truth of the matter. So I think we will get there. And in fact, I would predict that India is one of the first countries to get there. Now, is there actually going to be immunity to this virus? Definitely. And how long does it last? The honest answer is we don't know. Is the answer 1 month of immunity after you experience the virus? Unlikely, because our experience with MERS and SARS shows that that is anywhere between 1 or 2 years at least. And with other viruses, is much longer than that. So it's unlikely that it's only a couple of months based on what we know from other similar coronaviruses. Now, does it mean that the immunity will, first of all, let me just say that if you didn't build up immunity, if you didn't build up these neutralizing antibodies, we wouldn't be able to keep the virus out of our body in the first place. The virus would just stay in our bodies. So it is our body's antibodies that are protecting us from the virus and getting rid of the virus. So rest assured that we do acquire some amount of immunity. But since we don't know the duration of immunity, it's hard for us to predict how this will play out in the future. And the only long-term solution here is a vaccine. Now, a vaccine, as much as there are many candidates being pursued, is an extremely difficult enterprise. It's very challenging, and it's literally like a moonshot. It's really that sort of complexity. It's not an easy thing to develop a vaccine. There are many viruses, including coronaviruses like MERS, for which we've never been able to develop a vaccine. HIV, we've never developed a vaccine. No, it's now been 40 years. Not 40 years, it's been 30 years.
30.
No, it's been 40, 80s, yeah. It's almost 40 years we've not developed a vaccine. So we're in for a bit of a tough time with this. We are in an unknown zone, but let's keep our fingers crossed and let's hope for the best.
Give me a number in terms of percentage that needs to be infected to get herd immunity.
It depends really on the reproductive number. It's a function of mask wearing and so forth. So let's say you have mask wearing consistently and using the numbers that we've estimated for Tamil Nadu and so forth, that number would be about 50%.
50.
Once 45 to 50% get it, you've knocked down the transmission significantly. If we are not able to contain it through these other ways, then it will be more like 65, 67%.
I mean, I just wanted to get to whether it's going to be a high number, and even if it is 50%, that's a very, very high number. I mean, we're looking at half of our population. That may take quite some time to get to.
May not actually. Remember, if we are at, say, tens of millions, probably 100 million infections. Again, see this in time. You start with a few cases, probably even if you go back to January, you've hit 10 million infections, and remember, 10 million infections by early April itself. To climb from 1 infection to 10 million infections by early April is not hard to get from 10 million infections to 600 million infections. One is a factor of 10 million, one is a factor of 60 in terms of the math, right? So from 100 million, or from 10 million to 600 million infections is only a factor of 60. From 1 to 10 million is 10 million. We are much closer to that herd immunity number than we were to the beginning of the infection. So I think that's really the good news here in many ways.
Good. Some good news. I'm going to move on and try and understand from you about treatment and try and understand about the vaccine comment that you made. By when do you think that is going to come? Because if that is going to be one key solution, when should we be expecting it? And there's a whole race to get that vaccine out. Some thoughts on the whole vaccine and when do you think it will come?
So vaccine, it's not just a matter of it being safe, efficacious, and then being able to be at a price point that our populations can afford, and then being able to deliver it. Like this Moderna vaccine, everyone jumps up and down here, and people don't realize, A, it's going to be expensive, and second, it's going to be a vaccine that's going to require a cold chain of minus 80 degrees. We don't have a cold chain of minus 80 degrees in this country. So there's no way in which we can get the vaccine out to most of the population. And keep in mind, we try to vaccinate 26 million children who are born every year, and we achieve at best 74% of that. When we can't vaccinate even 74% of this 26 million target, what makes us think that we're going to be able to vaccinate 1 billion people, which is 50 times that number? It's going to be really hard, or 40 times that number. It's going to be really hard to do that. So I think that we've got to be careful about, dreaming about this vaccine as really being our solution in the short term. On the treatment, I'm far more optimistic because I think treatments, there will be something which works. Obviously, because remdesivir is sort of partially effective. There are trials going on for other things. I am much more hopeful of a treatment that lowers mortality. And frankly, if this virus kills fewer people, then I think we should just stop worrying about it, and that's the end of the story. It's because we're not able to control the mortality and it's killing people, that's really why it's causing so much of an issue. But, obviously there are different drug candidates as well. There's a big WHO trial called Solidarity 2, which is underway. And I'm very hopeful that something, whether it's dexamethasone or one of these others, is really going to be that solution there. because the advantage of using existing drugs is that one, we know their safety profile. Number two, we know how to make them, and number three, most of these drugs are generic, and so they can be cheaply made.
No.
And best of all, a lot of these are made in India. So if I had to bet, I'm going to bet on the treatment way ahead of the vaccine.
Sorry, would you repeat the last bit? If you were to bet?
I would bet on the treatment way ahead of the vaccine.
The treatment way ahead of the vaccine. Okay. So do you think, from hearing from your conversation, it seems to me the best way out of this mess is probably pray to get a mild form of coronavirus and get over it quickly.
Exactly.
So that is something which you say would probably make the most sense.
It would make the most sense, but let me add one more caveat in here. Remember, any new virus infecting us, we don't actually know all of the consequences very early. Like the microcephaly, I don't know if you all remember, Zika virus produces, these children with abnormally small, heads and brains. I don't know if you remember that.
I remember that. Yeah. Very clearly. Yeah.
Very clearly, you remember that. Now, we won't, I don't mean to scare you guys, but honestly, we don't know the long-term consequences of a coronavirus infection in whatever that might do. Does it increase the risk of Alzheimer's? Does it change mental health in some way? The honest answer is we don't know. It worries me that, for instance, a loss of smell and taste implies that this virus is somehow attaching itself to its neurons and affecting our nervous system in ways that we don't understand. Now, again, you have to keep in mind, the virus is not doing this because it's trying to do this to attack us. Virus is not interested in doing it. The most successful virus is a common cold virus because it's with us, it stays, doesn't bother us, and it lives, and that's what it really wants to do. But there may be long-term consequences of this coronavirus that we won't know for 5 or 10 years. So I don't also want to say, yes, just get a mild infection and move on. We don't actually know what these longer term consequences are because of what we're seeing with the potential, even short-term damage to the nervous system. And but you know what? That's what having a new virus really means.
It's a scary situation, and I think you're doing the right thing by bringing us back to ground. I think every time there is a easing of lockdown, people want to sort of quickly rush out. I think clearly the message which I'm getting is be warned, wear your mask. It is unpredictable. We don't know where we are, so just stay safe. Very clearly, that's the message I'm getting.
Yes, yes. Don't live in fear as well. No. We were out today and went to a bird park and so forth. So, try to live your life as best as you can within those constraints. Keep the elderly safe. And that's what I'm much more concerned about. Make sure that, that anyone above the age of 65 is actually indoors and kept safe. Let's not fear this.
Sure.
But let's be clear. This is something which came out of nowhere and it's a threat to humanity. But what can you do? And science will fight it. Just remember that there are hundreds of thousands of scientists who are working on every aspect of this day and night. We are on phone calls all the time on, what is the epidemiology, how much of lockdowns have, all of this. There's a lot of sharing of information. There's a whole global network that's working to make all of this happen, how to get the vaccines out. So this is the entire global enterprise is geared up for this. So, rest assured that there is also a system that's working to protect all of this.
Sure. And, I think I heard or read something about WHO mentioning it is airborne. I thought it was airborne, wasn't it? What were they trying to communicate?
What they're trying to communicate is that, see, for instance, airborne virus like a measles, you can transfer to someone, 50 yards away, because that truly is an airborne virus. It persists in the air. And we were not sure how it is with COVID. I would not get into that right now because honestly, what we're finding is that the transmission of COVID in India, and again, my knowledge very closely is based on data we have from places where, like Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh, it is not super transmissible. Okay, it is also a virus where super spreading is common. We see that in other countries as well. Most people who get the virus are not going to transmit. most people, but a very small proportion is going to transmit to a lot of people. So it's of course we can't tell you who that person is going to be exactly, but again, 9 out of 10 people who get COVID are not going to transmit to a single soul, and I know that's hard to imagine. That's so. But let me stop you by saying, Abhidra, that the problem for us is that it's a matter of risk, and as human beings, there are many risks we know how to deal with. You know the risk of crossing a road if there's a red light in Mumbai. You know, you just know it. You grew up that way. You know the risk of traveling in a suburban train, or you know what the risk of falling off. I mean, people just know these risks, so we condition our life to these risks.
Sure.
Here is a situation where we don't know what the risks are because we don't understand the science of it. That is what scares people. Otherwise, you know, we take the risks every day. You get on a plane, you're at risk. You get in a car, you're at risk. Whatever it's, you're at risk. So I think we should not be scared about this virus. Just understand that listen, this is just what nature's thrown upon us. It's just a situation, but it is not. It's not of this extraordinary deadliness or anything that we need to run in fear of.
Sure. No, I'm much more cautious than a regular Mumbaiker because I grew up in Calcutta. It was more dangerous to cross, and it was much more, it was more of a challenge to learn how to drive a car there. So I'm going to follow your word. But I did read a Goldman Sachs report recently, and the point you made out about mask and how it could save, it was banged on the same topic, and it sort of mentioned that the mask wearing could actually save the domestic economy from a 5% hit to GDP.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, it all sort of falls in place. Ramanan, I know we are getting close to that 60 minutes of the time that I asked you for. So very quick thoughts on generally the economic aspect of coronavirus. And clearly, vaccine is much later. This is going to be a write-off year, calendar year. Your thoughts very broadly and generally, we can't cover it all, on the socio-economic impact of coronavirus, please.
You know, I think in the short term, we're going to take a big hit. No question about it. I think that's already pretty obvious in terms of, businesses go under, non-performing assets will be in trouble, will increase. I think that's going to be true throughout the world, no matter how nicely the stock market is performing. But I also think there would be a rebound because there is a natural equilibrium for the economy based on goods and services demanded and how much people are willing to exercise that demand. And it will be hard for us to see past this. But I would see this as not a long-term impact on our economy, but really much more of these next 2 years are going to be difficult. And as long as, and with the caveats that we are able to achieve either herd immunity or get a vaccine, one of those two, or get a treatment, and we are also not experiencing some long-term challenges with these viruses mutating and coming back, or causing long-term damage, sort of a thing. I see this as really a short-term hit, and it'll be hard for us to see back to it. But I would certainly hope that in 2 years from now, we just put this behind us and said, "Oh, that was that really bad year when everything went for a toss." But I think we'll be back on our feet and we'll do quite well in a year.
Thank you. One thing which sort of I keep asking myself with this opening up and easing out, and some models which other countries have followed, whether it's the US, whether it's the EU, I'm still not able to decide what is the right thing. And then I read about the Sweden model. There was an article in New York Times on the 7th of July, and how it has become the world's cautionary tale. And for the audience, and please correct me, Ramanan. What I understand is Sweden sort of captured international attention by conducting this unorthodox open air experiment, and it hasn't worked. It has failed miserably. So not only have thousands of more people died, the neighboring countries have imposed lockdowns, and Sweden's economy didn't really fare any better by easing the lockdown. So, your thoughts on easing down with domestic help coming back in, and we trying to get on with our lives slightly. And you mentioned not to live in fear, but what do we do?
So I won't get into Sweden because I don't think people fully understand Sweden like
Okay,
fully. The Swedes are not like us. I mean, Swedes are, and as those of you who've been to Sweden know, if it's 1 in the morning and there's a red light in the pedestrian crossing, the fellow won't cross the road. They will stand and wait, for
fair
five
point.
minutes,
Fair point.
right? We are not like that. So
Sure.
our understanding. So when I talk to my Swedish collaborators, I have a Swedish Science Foundation grant. I was sitting and I said, "You guys have all seen the outside. I've been sitting at home for 3 weeks." They said, "No, we've also been sitting at home." And I said, "Why are you guys sitting at home?" They said, "You don't understand. In Sweden, when the public health authority advises that you stay at home, that's enough, and we'll all stay at home. So here you need a cop with a lathi and the jeep going around, and even then you can't get people to stay at home. So I think their lockdown is very different from ours. Their idea is generally people have actually stayed at home. They didn't do a good job controlling deaths in some old age homes, which is what got them into trouble. And of course, we don't know what the impact of not closing schools was for them. And that might have been what the mistake might have been there. But I don't think there's a huge difference between what they actually did and what other countries did. But let's get to us.
Yeah.
What happens for us really is it's going to be a period of caution, no question about it. It's definitely going to be a period of caution. What I don't think is a good idea is this kind of knee-jerk lockdown, open up, lockdown. That's coming from a political space where there's not enough science driving these. There's not enough epidemiologists in the country. There's a lack of a scientific. I mean, this is where the failure of our country has been, in that we failed on the science of it. And we don't have that leadership. That's why they say August 15th there'll be a vaccine and nonsense like this. Because that leadership, that absence of that leadership, basically puts the onus back on the political class, who then make these very knee-jerk sort of a reaction. And this is the worst thing for an economy. I mean, imagine if you're a small trader, you stock up on your supplies, and suddenly you're told next 3 weeks the place is going to be shut down. This is the worst thing you can actually do. What we need is far more measured, understood, scientifically driven approaches if you are going to shut down, and there's no need to even shut down entire cities. But it's because they don't have the knowledge base to know where the cases are coming from. There's still this myth of no community transmission, which I don't understand why it's such a thing to admit that we have community transmission. That those are the ways in which I feel India has failed, and I think that we have failed on the science, and we could have done so much better. We did not fail on the responsiveness. We did not fail on the taking the problem seriously. That was a problem for places like Mexico and Brazil, where the president was going around hugging people even when the epidemic was really taking off.
Yeah.
We didn't have that. We had a prime minister who was willing to wear a mask on television, and we had the lockdown very early. But I think we've not done well on the science.
No, thank you. Fair enough. I appreciate. So I'm going to ask you only a few more questions as we approach the 60 mark. As a researcher, as a let's put it this way, epidemiologically, what's your prediction about the second wave? And I'm talking about India. I'm not talking about the world.
So usually you have a second wave if you have really pressed down on the first wave significantly, then you end up having a second wave. It is not a given that you have a second wave at all. India may never have a second wave because we will pass through it to some semblance of herd immunity by the time we get through this. And we will have this high plateau of about 50, 70,000 infections a day for a fairly long period of time, reported infections again, and then we will cross through this. So I don't see any reason to suggest that we will knock down from here to a very low level of infections and then climb back again for a second wave. To do that, you need to have a control measure that's able to push the infections down. And we are nowhere. The sign of the peak is very simple. You don't need an expert to tell you when the peak is. The peak is the point at which you see infections coming down. You see your daily newspaper. If you don't see infections coming down, then you're not at the peak. So it's just as simple as that. So I don't think anyone has to ask where the peak is. The peak will be known to everybody when infections come down. And I think we're going to hit this high plateau when different states, have different, increases at different times, and that's what we see ahead for the next, at least the next 4 or 5 months.
Sure. And of course, add to that underreporting and
Yes.
less testing, so you don't know whether all that you read in the newspaper is totally correct. We may have to ask you for another conversation.
I worry if I've scared your audience enough, they might not want to hear anymore.
No, I don't think so at all, Ramanan. I think you have put things in perspective, and I think very clearly you have told people that, okay, you know, in cricketing terms, since I play a lot of cricket, take fresh guard. Don't just go and start hitting sixers, because you need to you know, protect your wicket.
Yes, absolutely. That's the right way to put it.
My last question, and it's a multiple questions in one. Predictions. What do you think we are going to be heading towards in, say, you know, end of July, say end of August, and, you know, maybe in 2 months from now? What do you think is the worst case scenario? Where do you think we could be in the best case scenario? I mean, just general thoughts, and I'm not going to hold you to this. I'm just trying to see and give people a perspective.
Right. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my computer's about to die. So very quickly, I think the perspective is going to be that, remember that anytime infections get out of control, you're going to have the government impose another lockdown. And so I think we're going to see the same sort of trajectory for the next, next couple of months. Nothing dramatic, but you should expect.
Oh, I think we've lost Ramanan. Just give us a few minutes. We'll try and get him back on the line. Sorry about that, everyone. We'll just try and get him back. Anyways, we were coming towards the end of it. We'll give him a few minutes. But just so that you know, we've done 6 other conversations. We started, well, I don't remember when we started, but we started several weeks back. We've had a pediatrician speak to us. We've had a dentist speak to us. Hey, Ramanan, welcome back. You'll have to unmute yourself. Hey.
Okay, sorry about that. I wasn't watching my computer. It just died.
Don't
worry. By saying that it's not going to be very different, but just keep in mind that we have faced, again, in cricketing terms, we have faced this so far with Delhi, Mumbai, and Chennai, which are our 3 best in terms of healthcare facilities. We're not going to be facing this in places with not so great healthcare facilities, right? Like Patna or Bhopal or Gwalior or Kolhapur or wherever else it might be. That's maybe how it's going to, it depends on how these places tackle COVID when the cases start going up there.
You haven't given me numbers.
Oh, I think the numbers is going to be, I would say the plateau will be at around, 50, 70,000 cases a day. That's what we're going to get to. We're now at about 28,000. We'll get to about 50, 70,000. I don't think we'll go above that. But 70,000 cases is a lot to deal with, because at our current mortality rate, you're dealing with about 1,000 deaths a day. We'll get to 1,000 deaths a day. It's going to be tough going. I mean, it's going to be tough.
Well, I guess a lot of thinking to do, and people need to continue to stay safe. Ramanan, it's been a pleasure, absolute delight to have you on the lockdown conversation. Thank you so much for sharing so much of information that you've given us today. We've learned a lot. I've learned a lot. I always believe as a sports person that when you play a sport, and you always want to play with somebody who knows much more than you, and that's the only way you get to learn. Clearly, the attendees would have taken back. At least if I were in their place, I would take back two or three things. One is we need to continue to be safe. There's clear need to be wearing masks, continue to maintain social distance, and washing your hands. This is not going to end anytime soon. The vaccine is nowhere, um, nowhere close to. We can keep hearing on the news, and I guess we'll just have to have you again whenever you discuss some of the points, which will be a session in itself.
Sure, happy to.
Thank you very much, Ramanan, and thank you everybody else for joining in. We'll see where we get to with the next conversation, and we'll keep you informed. A video of this conversation will be posted on the group, and will be emailed to you. And till we meet again, stay safe, stay well. Thank you very much, Ramanan. Thank you so much.
Take
Thank you.
care. Bye.
Bye. See you.